Look closer. This isn't just an abandoned building, decaying under the weight of time. It was a tool of an empire, a brutal machine built to tame a wild frontier. We often picture Japan as a land of serene temples and impossibly futuristic cities, a place of profound tranquility and polite efficiency. But that's a postcard image, carefully curated. If you know where to look in its more remote, forgotten corners, a much darker history is crumbling slowly back to dust. Travel with me to the edges of the nation, and you'll find the ghosts of prisons built during Japan's rapid, almost violent modernization in the late 19th century. These places were more than just jails. They were instruments of a terrifying national ambition. They were designed to break not just laws, but human spirits, all in the name of progress. What secrets were they hiding? And what truths are still entombed within their rotting walls? To understand these punishing places, you have to understand the moment they were born. In the late 19th century, Japan was a nation in a breathless sprint. The Meiji Restoration had thrown open the doors to the world after centuries of isolation, and the country was hurtling into modernity. It was an era of intense, almost fanatical change and ambition. The old ways of the samurai were being dismantled, and in their place, factories, railways, and a powerful military were rising at a dizzying speed. The nation was building industries, expanding its territory, and casting a wary, strategic eye towards its powerful neighbor, Russia, to the north. This geopolitical chess match drove a new, voracious demand for resources, for land, and for absolute control, especially in the wild, untamed territories of Hokkaido. This vast northern island was seen as Japan's own frontier, a wilderness to be conquered and fortified. To achieve this, the government found a brutal but brutally efficient solution: forced labor on an industrial scale. A special kind of prison was established, not in the cities, but in the harshest, most remote parts of the country. These weren't like the other modern prisons being built at the time, which often at least paid lip service to Western models of reform and rehabilitation. No, these frontier facilities were something else entirely. They were human engines, designed with cold calculation to build the infrastructure of an empire. On paper, the system worked. Roads were built, forests were cleared, borders were secured. But efficiency always has a cost, and Japan chose to pay it in human bodies. Nowhere was that cost more brutally calculated than at the frozen edge of the empire, on an island where the cold itself became a weapon. You will find no starker, more chilling example of this than in Japan's far north, in Hokkaido. This is the home of the most notorious of all these imperial prisons, Abashiri. Opened in 1890, it had one clear and unforgiving goal: to colonize the wild frontier of Hokkaido and build a strategic bulwark against potential Russian expansion. For the prisoners sent here, just receiving the sentence felt like a death warrant. Perched on the coast of the Sea of Okhotsk, Abashiri is a place of almost unimaginable cold. This is the southernmost point in the northern hemisphere where the sea itself freezes over, a phenomenon known as ryuhyo, or drift ice. Huge sheets of ice drift down from the rivers of Siberia, choking the coastline in a vast, white, alien landscape. The air is filled with the howl of Siberian winds that can freeze a wet towel solid in seconds. For the 1,000+ prisoners shipped to this frozen edge of the world, escape wasn't just meant to be difficult, it was meant to be impossible. But the horrifying truth of Abashiri wasn't just its location, it was the work. The prisoners' most infamous and deadly task was the construction of the 228-kilometer Central Road, an artery designed to connect this remote outpost with the more developed heart of Hokkaido. This wasn't construction, it was a death march. Chained together with heavy iron balls shackled to their ankles to prevent escape, the inmates faced a relentless onslaught of horrors. Malnutrition was rampant, their meager rations unable to sustain them through the grueling physical labor. Exhaustion was a constant state of being. Horrific accidents were a daily occurrence as they felled massive trees and cleared rugged terrain by hand. And then there were the wild brown bears of Hokkaido, drawn to the sounds and smells of the work camps. Records show that over 200 prisoners died building that road alone, their bodies often buried in makeshift mounds right alongside the path they had just carved from the earth. The road became grimly and aptly known as the Prisoner's Road, for the human toll quite literally buried beneath it. Inside the prison walls, life was a calculated system of psychological torment. The original wooden buildings, an architectural marvel of cruelty, were laid out in a radial, panopticon-style design. This meant that a single guard, positioned in a central tower, could watch every single inmate in all 5 cell blocks without the prisoners knowing if they were being watched at any given moment. This creates a terrifying psychological effect, the feeling of constant, invisible surveillance. The authority of the guard becomes an internalized omniscience, forcing prisoners to discipline themselves out of the perpetual fear that someone might be watching. It is a machine for creating and sustaining a power relation, independent of the person who exercises it. And yet, even from this inescapable fortress of wood and ice, one man did the impossible. His name was Yoshi Shiratori, a man who would earn the title the Japanese Prison Break King. Sent to Abashiri in the 1940s, he was cruelly left in a thin summer uniform to endure the brutal sub-zero Hokkaido winters, a punishment designed to break him. But Shiratori was nothing if not resourceful. He began a task of unimaginable patience. He famously used the salty miso soup from his daily meals to systematically, painstakingly, rust the thick metal bolts on his cell's tiny food slot. For months, through unimaginable cold and hunger, he quietly worked. Then, one night, during a wartime blackout that plunged the prison into absolute darkness, he made his move. He dislocated both of his shoulders, a feat of sheer will and agony, squeezed his emaciated body through the impossibly small, rusted-out opening, and vanished into the frozen night. He was the first, and to this day, the only person to have ever escaped from Abashiri Prison. The original, brutal prison was finally closed in 1984, replaced by a modern facility nearby. But the historic wooden buildings weren't torn down. In an incredible act of preservation, they were carefully moved, piece by piece, and reconstructed as the Abashiri Prison Museum, a chilling, silent monument to the Meiji era's savage ambition. Abashiri proved that imprisonment could be weaponized at an industrial scale. But not every prison needed chains, iron balls, or death marches to break the human spirit. Some relied on something quieter and far older. But not all of Japan's abandoned prisons were massive, brutal labor camps like Abashiri. To find a different kind of carceral ghost, we must travel to the windswept coast of the Sea of Japan, to Sado Island. This island has a long, sorrowful history defined by isolation. For centuries, being sent to Sado was a punishment considered second only to the death penalty. It was designated an official island of exile, the final destination for disgraced emperors, political losers, and intellectuals who fell out of favor with the powers on the mainland. The poet Hozumi no Asomi Oyu was sent here in the 8th century for criticizing the emperor. Emperor Juntoku was banished here in 1221 after a failed attempt to reclaim power from the shogunate, living out his days and dying on the island. The island itself was the prison. It seems fitting, then, that Sado is home to a different kind of abandoned jail, Aikawa Prison. This was no Meiji-era behemoth built for imperial conquest. It was a much smaller, entirely wooden facility that operated for a brief period in the mid-20th century, from 1954 to 1972. While the island's infamous gold mines had their own dark history of using convict labor centuries earlier, Aikawa's purpose was more mundane. It served as a short-term holding facility for local criminals and pretrial detainees before they were transferred to larger prisons on the mainland. When it was shut down in 1972, it wasn't preserved or memorialized. It was simply abandoned. Today, it stands as one of the few completely wooden prisons left in Japan, a haunting survivor frozen in time. It's now an unmanned public site, left to the elements. Exploring it feels profoundly different from Abashiri. Ivy creeps up the nearly 10-foot wooden walls. Inside the cell blocks, you can still see the original tatami mats on the floors, decaying in the damp air. The heavy, rusted metal locks still hang on the cell doors. Unlike Abashiri's carefully reconstructed museum, Aikawa is a true ruin. Walking through its silent, empty corridors feels less like a history lesson and more like discovering a secret, sorrowful garden. A beautiful but melancholy reminder of the island's long, inescapable legacy as a place of exile. Aikawa was exile made physical, a reminder that punishment does not always need spectacle. But when Japan's ambitions reached beyond its own shores, imprisonment took on an even darker role. Stories like these are often buried by time, quietly erased once they stop being useful. If this exploration matters to you, subscribing helps keep these histories from disappearing completely. But the story doesn't end on Japan's home islands. The tendrils of this history stretch far beyond. To see the full, terrifying picture, we have to travel far south, across the Pacific, to the island of Saipan in the northern Mariana Islands. Here, half swallowed by the relentless green of the jungle, stands the old Japanese jail, a concrete ghost from a different, even more destructive kind of imperial project, total war. Built before World War II when Saipan was part of a Japanese territory called the South Seas Mandate, the jail's purpose shifted dramatically during the brutal Pacific Campaign. In 1944, the island became the epicenter of the Battle of Saipan, one of the deadliest conflicts of the war. After the battle, as American forces fought to take the island, this jail became a holding center, its cells filled with captured American prisoners of war. The complex itself tells this grim story. It consists of an administration block, smaller, more foreboding isolation cells, and a larger building with multiple cell blocks. Today, the weathered concrete walls are still deeply scarred from the fighting. You can trace the lines of bullet holes and the pockmarks from shrapnel, a physical record of the violence that unfolded here. Perhaps most poignantly, you can find graffiti etched into the walls by soldiers, scrawled names and dates in both English and Japanese, a direct human link to the men who were held and who fought and died right here. Unlike Aikawa's overgrown, quiet beauty, the Saipan jail is a stark, decaying relic of raw military conflict. Its history is so charged that it became part of modern mythology, for a time fueling persistent but debunked theories that the famed aviator Amelia Earhart was secretly imprisoned and executed here after being captured by the Japanese. While those claims have been thoroughly disproven, the fact that they took root here speaks to the site's haunting legacy and its connection to the war's countless mysteries. This jail, being reclaimed by the jungle on a remote Pacific island, is a crucial final piece of the puzzle, showing how incarceration became a key instrument in Japan's vast and ultimately doomed war effort, from the frozen frontier of Hokkaido to the isolated shores of Sado Island, and across the ocean to the jungles of the Pacific. These abandoned prisons tell a single, unsettling story. They were never just places of confinement. They were tools designed to shape land, silence dissent, and sustain empire. Abashiri turned human suffering into infrastructure. Aikawa perfected isolation as punishment. Saipan revealed how incarceration became inseparable from total war. Together, they stand as quiet evidence that modernization, empire, and security often advance behind locked doors, far from public view. And when those doors finally close for good, what remains is not triumph, but residue. Wood rotting in the cold, concrete crumbling in the heat, and histories that refuse to stay buried. These prisons may be abandoned, but the systems that created them were never truly dismantled. They were buried, rebranded, and absorbed into the modern world. In the next episode, we go inside one of Japan's most controlled and least understood prisons, a facility that still operates today, largely hidden from public scrutiny. That story examines what happens when a system never closes its doors, only refines how it controls what the world is allowed to see.